Hey, y'all. We are live, me and Jared. This is another episode of Poly Side Eye. This is our 49th episode. Can't believe it's like we're almost at 50.
That's crazy. I legit remember like it was yesterday the first time we started. So yeah, it's been what, like 4 years now? Oh, well, yeah, about we started like early on in COVID. So like 5 years really.
I was in my old apartment.
Yeah, I was in my first North Carolina. I've lived in two different apartments since then.
So we're coming to you with another happy, optimistic episode about the American dream. I think us as millennials were definitely sold on this. And my question to y'all in the chat is, do you believe in the American dream? I know I don't, but before we get into that, did you ever believe in the American dream at all?
I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by an American dream. So like I feel like there is this kind of mythic idea that you should aspire to be a homeowner and have a family and to have kids and to have that quote unquote good job and to get a quote unquote get an education, like all of the like things that you're supposed to check off. I mean, I was a weird kid, so like I never felt like pressured to do those things. But I feel like a lot of my friends and like a lot of people I know do. And what I've noticed is that I feel like a lot of people who haven't accomplished those things have some sense of like either feeling of like they haven't accomplished anything, or disappointment, or cynicism. So yeah, I'm just like curious to kind of get a sense of like what people think about like quote unquote the American dream.
Right.
And if they don't think it exists, like, well, whatever it is, like, why is that? So yeah.
Right. Because I think first, talking about it, what is it to you, like the audience? And this is what it is to me. So I wrote it down to make sure I got it. So it just, to me, I think it's like where everyone has an opportunity to become successful if they just work hard. Like access to an education, definitely financial stability at the very top of it, and you're able to provide for a family. Now, it's always weird to me because like wanting a family is in the American dream. I just thought it was just providing for yourself and a family if you wanted one. But yeah, financial stability is basically, the American dream for me. Success. Like that it's afforded to everyone who lives here.
So by success, you just mean not have to like worry about your income at all.
Financial freedom.
Okay. I think that's a very, American idea, in the sense that America as an idea is kind of rooted in this idea of like self-sufficiency and like having the opportunity to be self-sufficient, like not have to necessarily struggle or be dependent on somebody else for like your well-being. That is what people call Republican ideology. Not in like, so we'll get into this, but like one thing I try to explain to my students, especially when I teach my intro to philosophy class, is that republicanism, or being a Republican, has a proper meaning. And I don't mean that in like the Republican Party aspect, but there is a whole like ideology of like republicanism that I think most Americans cling to. And again, it is this idea of like, individualism, having property, but not necessarily property just for the sake of owning property, but because you believe that having property will enable you to essentially have freedom from, dependency, essentially. So that's a long-standing kind of like Republican ideal. But my whole thing is like, and so the thing that kind of like made me bring this up is because the New York Times had a piece that they ran a few weeks ago, and I can see the link to it if people are interested in reading it. But I thought it was really fascinating because they asked Gen Z readers or respondents to like give their sense of like what they thought the American dream is and what if they thought it still existed. And most of them gave like the typical answers, like I want to be able to own a home, I want to be able to like get married, I want to be able to like have a family if I want one. The same kind of idea that's been peddled about for generations. But what was fascinating is that none of them thought that they could actually achieve it. Like they thought that most of those like ideals were beyond them, not because they couldn't work hard enough, but because they didn't feel like the opportunities existed for them to actually get those things or to acquire those things. And so what was fascinating was that the interviewer was like, okay, well, if you don't think that's possible, what does the American dream mean to you? And most of the answers they still gave were some variation of what they said was impossible, whether it was owning a home or getting married or whatever. And so like my whole thing is like, okay, well, this is an interesting paradox, because if you don't think it's possible, why do you still desire it? Like why then don't you create a new kind of target or a new idea of what that means to you and try to work towards that if you don't think the standard thing is possible? So I just thought that was an interesting kind of like tension that I wanted to like bring to the audience and get a sense of like what other people are thinking. So that was the one thing that made me think about this. The other thing was a video somebody I saw posted on Instagram, and it was one of like, I think it was BET's or maybe The Root, one of those like sites, like went out into like a park in Chicago and was just like asking random Black people whether or not they believe in the American dream. And of course, most of the people they interviewed was like, no, like it's not for us. It's not for Black people. It's like for white people. And then even when they were asking people like, well, so what is the American dream to you? Like they were just like being able to do your own thing and to be self-sufficient and be individualistic. And I'm just like, well, you just said that wasn't possible for you. So like, what is really, so do you just want that, but in Black? Like I've been trying to figure out like what people desire. Because I don't know if people actually know what they desire. I feel like we've been socialized to desire a certain thing. But when the rubber meets the road, we don't actually know if we do in fact want these things. So yeah, I want to hear.
It's very interesting. I guess if you don't think it's possible, then I mean, what now? But I feel like how they were answering it is just like, we're gonna find our own way. Like we're gonna like make the dream happen, but I don't know, like they don't believe like the American dream, I think, something that afforded to all Americans. And I think when you ask a Black person that, they don't believe it. So if it's not afforded to me, I'm going to find my own route to success. That's how I took it as.
Yeah, their measure of success were the same things that they said they didn't think were possible. So like, that's what I was saying. Like they were like the American dream as they understood it, home ownership and all these things were not possible. But when, again, pushed on what it is that they felt like was possible, they essentially gave similar answers, but essentially in Black. So I was just like, so, yeah, like what's that? It's like that Oprah meme where she's like, so what is the truth? Like, what do people actually want? And I think this is a really important question because, like, really politics is driven by what we desire, like what we think we are entitled to. Especially in like our society now, because we live in such a developed consumer society. So like most of us are socialized to act upon our desires. Like that's what we're doing when we go to the mall. Like we have these desires, things that we've been fed through advertisements, and now we have an outlet to like actually act on those desires. But that's not just true for like buying things. It's also like porn. The reason porn is so popular is because it taps into these like libidinal desires that people have, but they aren't being fulfilled in their like day-to-day lives. And so like we have an economy that's structured around presenting us things that we desire. But the big question that everybody all the way back to Freud has tried to understand is like, okay, so why do we desire the things that we desire? Like, where do these desires come from? Like, if we say we don't think the American dream is possible, but when asked, like, well, what do you want? You say the same things that you just said you didn't think were possible. It opens up this question of like, maybe we just don't know. Maybe we don't have the imagination to like think of something other than what we've been socialized to want. So, yeah.
I just think no one wants to be poor. That's all.
Yeah, there's that. So I don't think anybody wants to be poor. I don't think you would be hard pressed to find anybody in the world that wants to be poor. Some people might be resigned to being poor, but like I don't think anybody desires being impoverished.
I just wanted to read some comments. I think the majority desires affordable housing, healthcare, schooling, and good amenities, but a lot of people are still chasing the way it used to be kind of things. Success is how you define it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would hope that people would define it in their own terms and not what they've just been kind of spoon fed.
Oh, and also Rich the Fish asks, Jared, have you read Ezra Klein's book Abundance? I did, and I didn't quite like it. I thought it was quite naive and a bit economically repressive.
No, I haven't read it, but I've listened to some of the interviews that Ezra and his co-author, I can't remember his name, have done about it. And my whole thing is like the problem with capitalism isn't the production. Like we produce more than enough for everybody. The problem is distribution in the sense that in capitalism, there's kind of like three things you have to think about. You have to think about what's being produced. So when you go to the grocery store, those things got there not by like nature. It got there because people did the work and like picking the crops. And a lot of this work is actually not automated and stuff. So like you have to think about what's being produced, how is that getting to people. You also have to think about how is wealth being distributed. So like how do people have access to what's being produced? And then lastly, like the consumption part. So like who's actually consuming what's being produced? So like you have to think of all three of those questions. And to me, abundance focuses too much on just like the production. Like that's not the problem. The problem is that in the last 5 years, we've had the biggest upward redistribution of wealth in like American history, in the sense that the whole inflation, I've talked about this before, the inflation was essentially to weaken the purchasing power of significant portions of the population because people did have more disposable income. So what you were finding is that it was becoming more competitive to get to buy things, to buy commodities and stuff. And so in raising the prices, you essentially raise the barrier to entry for people who have lower incomes. And so that's the problem. The problem is the distributional aspect, not the production aspect. So I just feel like they misdiagnose what's going on, but of course they would, because they don't have an analysis of capitalism. They just take it for granted. And as long as you take capitalism for granted, it is not even like a capitalism good or bad thing, but like you at least need to understand like production and distribution and circulation. Like that's kind of consumption. That's kind of like the whole idea of an economy, but they just kind of take all that for granted. So yeah.
Let me see. Nicolette wrote, well, considering they were just randomly asked in a park, give them a little grace. I'm bad at thinking on my feet, especially for something that requires nuance.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Like, so I wasn't saying that in like a disparaging way. Like, these are hard questions. Like in all my classes, I ask my students repeatedly throughout the semester with how they define freedom, and like they really have a hard time with that one. And I don't expect them to have like a ready-made definition. The whole idea behind it is hopefully in thinking about the complexity of the question, it forces you to like wrestle with some like maybe some difficult thoughts and maybe some uncomfortable thoughts you have. So yeah, I agree. I try to be pretty like generous and like patient with these things.
Do you know where I guess the American dream came from? Like what president, like what period of time and what president was serving then? Or
yeah, so like I kind of said earlier, America has long had this kind of like Republican, again, I'm going to give it don't think about the Republican Party. Like the way we talk about Republican and Democrat and liberal conservative, not throw all of that out the window, because all of that is it's just distorting. Like it doesn't map onto like any actual like intellectual thought or like history or whatever. But the kind of the original idea of America or one of the main ideas of America was like it was supposed to be this kind of Little House on the Prairie type society, like where people had their land. The ideology was called free labor, free soil, free men. People had their land. They could essentially sell their labor for a wage if they wanted to. Like it didn't have to be obligate. Like the idea that we had to work in exchange for a wage forever was not really accepted until like maybe the late 19th, early 20th century. And I would argue it still isn't. I think most people who are cynical, or rather people who retaliate against their employers and stuff, I think a lot of what they're retaliating against is the oppression they feel in their wage labor relationship. So when you're at work, you don't feel like you can be yourself. You feel like you have to submit to authority. You have to feel like you have to follow commands. Like that's very antithetical to kind of the American ideology. And so we have always had this kind of like, anti kind of authoritarian kind of like attitude that's always been there. But the American dream that we probably think of in terms of like home ownership, white picket fence, that type of ordeal really didn't emerge until I would say the 1930s. So after the Great Depression, what ends up happening is that the real estate industry really needs a lifeline from the government to like essentially save itself. And so real estate in tandem with the federal government created a whole kind of so the public relations, we've heard of the public relations industry, that all emerged in like the late 1920s, early 1930s, essentially to propagandize people to like desire home ownership. So they came up with
there goes that word again, propaganda.
Yeah, but so propaganda, we think of it as negatively, it has a negative connotation now, but like really up until like World War II, it didn't have a negative connotation. Like propaganda was just a neutral term. It's just like the idea behind propaganda was that, there's just too much information out there. It was very conservative and very, there was a sense that, people weren't smart enough, weren't reasonable enough to like know what they needed to know or like to reason for themselves. So the idea was that you had to tell people not only what to desire, but like also what they should know and how they should feel about certain things. And so there was a whole campaign created to get people to desire home ownership. And it would say things like real men own their homes, or real men, and of course it would be a white man, because these things were all racialized. So it'd be a white man in the flyers. I can send you some of the cartoons and stuff if you're interested. But yeah, so there was a whole like propaganda campaign to get people to desire home ownership. And then the banks obviously loved this because all of these mortgages were federally backed. So even if you had people who defaulted in their mortgage, real estate companies knew they would still get their check from the government, because the government, that was where we got Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and all those organizations. So it really can be traced to the early 1930s. But I would say before that, there's always been this kind of like push for independence that I think has been there since the beginning. But this particular idea of like home ownership and white picket fence and suburban life, that kind of ideal, I would say probably about a century old.
Mm-hmm. So what is the what now then, since we mostly don't believe in this dream? Like,
well, that's the thing. So do people not believe in it? So like, I've been reading this really interesting book. It's called The Sublime Object of Ideology. And one thing he talks about there is like cynicism as a form of ideology, in the sense that why do we continue to strive for things that we know are not possible? Like if you believe that, this American dream is not for you, why do you keep striving for it? So the what now for me was kind of like, well, are people going to continue to strive for it and remain kind of cynical about their prospects for getting it? Which to me is not really, I would prefer people to like accept in some ways that maybe that isn't for them, and then hopefully have an avenue to create a new idea. Like, so maybe this is an opportunity. Like, we talk about, people will say, oh, we're always talking about the negative side. I'm like, but the positive side is that in this recognition that these things that you've been socialized to desire are probably not possible or not probable, this opens up a whole opportunity for you to like write a whole new kind of idea about what you actually want and what you feel like you are striving for. Now, a lot of that is kind of predicated upon the question of like survival, in the sense that people equate striving for the American dream with their survival, which is understandable. Like, we got to go to work, we got to eat, like we got to put food on the table, we got to get a check. Like, that's true. But like, to what end? Is there anything beyond the survival? And if so, if there's anything beyond just the desire to survive, what is that?
What if there isn't?
No, I mean, that's kind of the nihilistic question. If you don't think there's anything beyond just like waking up every day to try to survive, that's how people end up in, again, this like state of depression. Like, that's where you get into this like sense of like, oh, life has no meaning. I'm just waking up every day to just like work and like survive. And I don't think that's true. I don't think most people think that. I think most people have some broader kind of like, animating desire beyond just like wanting to make it to the next day.
That did make me think of, how can I say this without putting somebody on Front Street? Like how some people say like they don't feel fulfilled in what they're doing. You know where I'm going with this? Like, yeah, so I could just see a lot of people thinking that like this is what I have to do to survive, even though like they just, they don't even feel fulfilled. It's just what I have to do in my means of survival.
Right. Yeah. But the question is like, and so, okay, I agree. So ultraviolet just mentions most people do think that because that is their life. Yes, it is true that a lot of people are their entire existence is just trying to make it to the next day. And I admit that. But what about for the people who aren't? Let's say the people who might have a little bit of extra disposable income, but feel kind of trapped, or they feel like this American dream is just beyond their reach. Again, I want to bring it back to the New York Times article, because the people that they interviewed were people who, they had jobs, like good, quote unquote, good jobs. So many of them did.
It was white and black, right?
Yeah, it was a mixed crowd. Yeah. And a lot of them who, there was this sense of like, I did everything right. Like I went to school, I did this thing, I did all the things I was told to do, but now I don't get those. I'm not entitled to those things, or I can't get the things that I was promised. And so my bigger question was like, okay, so for the people who feel as though, or who have done the things that they were quote unquote told to do, but don't feel like the other end of the bargain is being upheld, what are they thinking? Like, I can't really answer the question because I never desired for home ownership or a marriage and white picket. I've never wanted any of those things. So like, I genuinely can't relate to that kind of feeling of like disappointment, because you can't be disappointed if you never had the expectation in the first place. So I'm curious, for people who did have the expectation for home ownership, for these things, for those people, and they're not meeting that, like, how do you square that circle? Like, how do you resolve, if at all, maybe you don't resolve this kind of like tension between what you desire and what you've actually gotten? I don't know. So
you just made me think of something like, with the whole marriage and home ownership. Like, I think I was in maybe like my late 20s, maybe early 30s, when I was just like, you know what? I don't really care about being married. Like, it's just not a goal of mine. So it just was never a priority after that. And then with home ownership, I'm just like, I'm already in debt like a million other people in the country. Like, why would I put myself in further debt, or what I have to prove with getting a home, like when I'm just paying rent right now?
Okay, so to that point, okay, so do you ever feel any sense of like dread about this? Like, does it?
Not at all. Not
Okay.
at all. Like, as far as like getting married, and as far as home ownership, like there's other things in the American dream where I still like, well, I still want to be financially, have financial freedom and stuff like that. I'm still going for that. That's priority. But the other things where it's just like, okay, well, I don't really need to focus on this anymore. And it is kind of a relief, because I remember like I'm 30 years old. Like, why am I not owning a home right now? I'm just like, this isn't realistic at all. Like, why am I striving to do this? Who am I trying to impress? So that's why,
So I'm well, again, I never really had the desire, but like, it seems to me like for you, it's just kind of like, oh, I feel kind of liberated, because now I don't feel beholden to like these pressures that, have been placed on me from, the way I've been socialized. But I do think, and so ultraviolet makes a good point. Like, I do feel like there are some people who they do feel some sense of like, failure, like some sense of regret or like disappointment. And so like my question again, for those people, do you continue to kind of, allow that disappointment to fester? Or do you say, maybe I can reimagine what the dream means to me, or what my future looks like to me, not necessarily what we see in movies or what we see on social media or what I've been taught, or when I go home for the holidays and people ask me, when am I getting married? Like, I can see beyond all of that and chart a new path for myself. But it seems like people in the comments are telling me that people are either depressed about it, which is sad, or like it's just changed them. Like and so like, yeah, it seems like people are kind of in this impasse. Like they're just kind of running up against a wall.
Mm-hmm. See, I remember like this as well. There's people I dated scolded me for not wanting to buy a damn house. I remember like it would be, oh, you still rent at this age, I was just like, fuck yeah. I mean, have you seen this economy?
So the thing with home ownership is we have written home ownership into nature in the sense that we treat home ownership as if it is a guarantee. Like, now I'm a guarantee.
Yeah, I've made it.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, now with housing prices getting so expensive and also insurance costs getting so expensive, it's going to be increasingly less and less of unless you just live in like a part of the country that is just having like crazy like property value appreciation. Honestly, like, it's not going to be the same kind of like, windfall that it was for people in like the early 2000s before the first real estate crash, for a host of reasons. Again, the insurance costs are a big thing, and insurance costs are going to keep going up because insurance is one of the biggest sectors of our economy. And so like, we don't talk about this enough, but like America's main economy is finance, in insurance. They call it the fire section. So finance, insurance, and real estate. So like all of those, when those prices of those things go up, the American economy is actually growing and doing better, quote unquote, because when you raise people's insurance premiums, that raises their profits. The same thing with medical costs. So like if your medical premiums go up, like that's good for these businesses' bottom line. So like there is a structural imperative to make sure that real estate prices keep going up. And also because cities depend on the revenue from real estate property values going up to like fund most of their basic services. And so like you're not gonna, people like, back 50, 40 years ago, people were buying houses for like, $40,000 and $50,000. And like, that's just not going to be the case anymore. And so I think we have, again, told ourselves that it is this like fail safe, route to take. And I'm just like, yeah, but a lot of this is requiring so much of scaffolding and policies and like injection of money from the Treasury and the Fed and all of these things to keep the system kind of propped up. And there's no guarantee that it's going to stay that way. So like, I think we should be honest about that. But again, people don't think of home ownership as a political thing. They think of it as like, that's just the way it's always been. And I'm like, no, it's not just the way it's always been.
While we're on that topic, I wanted to highlight someone's question. Is home ownership not a way to generational wealth, or at least leaving your kids better than yourself?
So this is what I was saying before. Like, so home ownership, and this is really why we have this huge rate. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard the racial wealth gap. So a lot of the reason that people have this intense, commitment to home ownership and thinking it's like this way to build wealth is because there was a stretch of American history where there was a huge, again, after I was explaining after the Depression, the real estate industry exploded. And so like a lot of that generational wealth, so-called, was created in like a 3-decade period, from like maybe the early 1930s to like maybe the late 1960s, early 1970s. And there was kind of a break and then another huge kind of expansion from like maybe the late 80s to like the early mid 2000s. But if you didn't get in for those 2 windows, like pretty much, I don't want to say it's impossible to like build wealth through homeownership, but it's increasingly difficult. So like, again, I think we attribute these like historical periods to, or rather we think that what happened was like some force of nature, and as opposed to just a kind of a historical accident. So long story short, it was a path to building generational wealth. I would say now that's like increasingly less possible.
And we have some homeowners in the chat. I own a house. It's the ghetto. Only reason I have my house is because it was passed down to me. I would never be able to afford a house.
Yeah, so that's another thing. So like a lot of people pass property down to their children or other dependents.
Please do not fall for home ownership as this amazing financial asset. Sometimes there are money traps, especially within a crazy economy.
Yeah, no, they're right. Absolutely
And
right.
someone put the same way they used to tell us about student debt. That student debt is good debt. I've never heard that. That's a good debt to have.
What's a good debt to have?
Student debt.
Yeah, so this whole like good debt, bad debt thing is also kind of ideological in the sense that the reason that they call it that is because the idea was that, well, if you get an education, the odds are like, oh, well, you'll probably get a good job and like be able to like pay it off, as opposed to like if your debt is through like, credit card debt or like payday loan place or something like that, like you're gonna pay these outrageous like interest fee and like it's not really a quote unquote good investment. But again, like, it's a lot of this is rooted in a particular understanding of the economy from like the mid 20th century.
Right. Someone asked me a question like, what is financial independence to me? And look, I think I've said this before on the show. Like, I think it's to the point where I hardly have to look at my bank account and me having, I'm not going to say no debt, but not a lot of debt. That's what financial independence is to me, where I can live happily and I don't feel like I'm living check to check. But I know that's like pretty much what, 60% of the country. You think how much percentage of the country you think is living from paycheck to paycheck?
I feel like there was a study that came out maybe on, I want to say maybe it was in the Washington Post recently. I think they were saying like 40% of Americans essentially don't have like $500 saved up in like savings. So like in event of like a medical emergency or any type of emergency, really, they would be kind of like shit out of luck. So people are, also the inflation of the last, the COVID inflation, really we should call it the COVID upward redistribution of wealth, because that's what it was. That really stretched people really thin, because it wasn't just like raising the price of like goods, so like groceries and gas and stuff, but it also was like services. So everything from like insurance to like your haircuts have pretty much gone up pretty significantly in the last 4 to 5 years. So we've had this inflation where prices for some things, so like prices for like, car insurance from like 2020 to 2025 is up like 70%. Wages have only gone up maybe like 10 on average. So people are being squeezed, but so a lot of people are struggling, honestly.
Yeah. I just wanted to highlight this comment because it just made me chuckle. Homeowners insurance and taxes are higher than Diddy on freak off nights.
Yeah, so like a lot of states are trying to impose like caps or insurance relief on homeowners and stuff, but it's tricky again because insurance is such a big portion of the United States economy. So if you put a restriction on people's and insurance companies to be able to raise their prices, it would probably, a lot of them would probably go out of business. So like states are trying to like reconcile that. I don't think you can. That's why I think you need to socialize insurance. But I'm not gonna get on my high horse about socialism, but like essentially that's what people want. They want relief from like the bad things from like the market economy under capitalism. And I'm just like, that's just socialism. I was actually gonna tweet this the other day, but then I didn't, because I was like, they're like, none of my tweets get any engagement anymore. I think because
unless they're selfies.
Yeah, that's the only tweets that get engagements are selfies. If I post anything related to like anything that's not that, like I might get like 1 or 2 likes, 1 or 2 responses, if that. But I was just gonna say, like, if you're asking for, like some type of like insurance relief, renters relief, rent freezes, some type of, any of that, that's all just some variation of socialism. So like all these people, like so many people are requesting socialism, but because we live in this society where that word has been so taboo for so long, people don't know that's what they're actually like calling for, but that's what they're calling for.
Just your age, I felt this. Like financial freedom is having double ovens in my kitchen and all my bills on auto pay.
That's true. I haven't graduated to that point yet, so
I refuse to put anything on auto pay these days.
Auto pay, but not like huge things. It's like small things.
This is a question for you, Jared. What's your honest opinion on generational wealth?
Okay, so here's my thing in generational wealth. So wealth is okay. So wealth is a relationship. So we think of wealth as just something that just exists, but you really should think of the whole economy, not just the U.S. economy, but the whole global economy as a one big balance sheet. And money is just being circulated about and moving around, and one person's dollar is another person's dollar. It's just like you have to think about it in those terms, because if you do, then you realize that if it's zero sum, that means if some people are getting wealthier, that means other people must necessarily be getting poorer under capitalism, not as a fact of nature, but in the way that capitalism organizes itself as a mode of production. And it's not just because people are greedy. Yes, people are greedy, but like that's not the real impetus behind that. The impetus behind it is because the whole system is predicated on growth and investment, and the only way that you can grow and invest is by accumulating wealth. So when wealthy people accumulate more of it, that means it comes at the expense of somebody else. So my whole thing is like, I would rather just get beyond this whole like, if some people have to have wealth, that means other people have to be poor. I would rather us move beyond that and like actually try to organize our society in a way that it doesn't have to be zero sum like that. And so I just think the generational wealth question kind of bogs us down back in this same kind of zero sum scenario. It's just like, well, some people we shouldn't have to be asking about who wins and loses. Like the whole idea is like, we don't need to ask that question because we produce enough for everybody. So like, there's no reason to like pick winners and choosers. Like we could rationally organize a society in a way that didn't have to be the case. And so I think focusing so much on generational wealth, this is another reason I'm skeptical about reparations, because again, reparations to me, especially if you leave everything else kind of as is. So if let's imagine that every Black person in America got like a $500,000 check deposited in their bank accounts tonight. I can promise you by like tomorrow morning, there will be a hyperinflation of the magnitude that Germany experienced in the 1920s, in the sense that you wouldn't be able to buy anything with that, because again, wealth is relational. So like, if people get this money, the idea is like, oh, well, that's coming at the expense of someone else. So there would be a kind of a rebalancing of the economy. And so I just want us to get beyond all that and like try to think more holistically and not try to.
Somebody gonna call you a Republican or something, like call you an op. Jared don't want reparations, y'all.
I'm not opposed. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to reparations if we didn't, not under capitalism though, because it would be counterproductive. Like, as long as you're gonna let JP Morgan Chase, which is a too big to fail firm, distribute that money or manage or finance that money or whatever, all you're doing is making Jamie Dimon richer. So like, I would rather that not be the case. Now, if we want to consider that after we've gotten beyond capitalism, then maybe, but like not under capitalism.
Is there anything else under our topic that you wanted to get across as far as like the American dream and everything?
Yeah. Did anybody in the chat give their definition of like what they think the American dream is?
I think
everybody here believe in it. It's whatever it is.
Okay, so question to the audience. What is the American dream to you? You can put it in the comment section if you're watching later on and you're not in the live chat and you're wondering, do they believe in it?
Yeah, I want to know, like, what is the American dream? Like, how can we say, like, if it doesn't exist, what is it? And like, if you don't believe that the way we've defined, like, I want to know what is people's kind of vision of like all of this? Like, why are we doing all of this? What are we striving for?
I love how Rich the Fish keep bringing up housewife references. Jared is not going to get any of it.
What was that?
No, he was like, my American dream is Roa's season 6 cast and the world going back to 2014.
The world going back to why 2014?
Was
there like anything significant that happened in 2014 that we should want to go back to? Like, I'm confused.
I don't know. So let me just get this out the way right quick. We can, while y'all answering that question, I knew somebody was going to bring this up about Amanda Seales, and I already sent that video to Jared just to get his opinion, because I know that you probably didn't think that she was completely wrong.
Well, I was just like, there's almost 40 million Black people in America. So when you say that Obama didn't do anything for Black people, my question is like, well, which Black people? Because if you were a Black person who was an executive at some Fortune 500 company, you probably benefited pretty abundantly under Obama. Like the stock market did wonderfully under Obama. Now, if you're a Black person who has to work for a wage, or part-time, or like what, probably not as much, but that's true for all working people, because most Black people are working people in the sense that they're not in the upper, they don't have investments in Wall Street, they don't speculate in the stock market. So like, it depends which Black people you're talking about. Like, there is no, I try not to just talk about Black people as a we always say Black people are in a monolith, and I'm always like, yeah, but we don't apply that to like class analysis, in the sense that, again, Tyler Perry probably benefited from Obama and Oprah probably benefited from Obama, but like, so it depends who you are. So like, to say that no Black people benefited is not true, but we would have to define what we mean by Black people when we wanted to like approve or disprove that statement.
Yeah, they lit her ass up. Like, oof, man.
Well, most of the people, because a lot of people were like, oh, well, he inspired people and he gave people hope and he made people feel good about being Black. And it was like, I kind of scanned the comments and there was some variation of that. And, I try not to be dismissive of it, because I don't really care about, even when I was in like elementary school, I always hated when we had like inspirational speaker day at school. I was just like, oh, shut the fuck up. Like, I just didn't want to hear that. It was just like, I never bought that. Like, my parents just pretty much let me just read my books, and I was reading like, 1984 and stuff. And I was like in second grade. Like, I just didn't care. I didn't care about all of that like mythic speak, but I've recognized that a lot of people do feel something out of hearing him speak and like the things that he says, and it makes them feel good about themselves. So sure, like I think people should feel good about themselves, but like,
I think it was her delivery as well. It was just like, duh, he didn't do anything for Black people.
Well, yeah, she's very like matter of fact about things, but she does that because it gets people riled up. So like, on one hand, it's smart because to get clicks and views, you either get people riled up or you get people on your side, and like, you essentially tell people what they want to hear. Like, if you say anything that's kind of ambiguous, or like you're not sure where people stand on things, people don't know what to do with you. But she says things that get people pissed off, and so like, people are gonna share it and click it and comment and engage with it, and like, that's really all she cares about.
I'm starting to see some parallels between her and Candace Owen these days, because someone made a comparison. I was like, but now, like, I feel like they're almost two different sides of the same coin. So Tanisha Guy wanted to highlight your comment. I literally had to leave the country to have the American dream of only having one job and having free time after work to do my little hobbies. So I'm guessing that's what the American dream is to her, having,
leisure time
to, leisure time.
Yeah, I mean, so funny enough, we talked about this on the show before, but in the mid 20th century, it was pretty much expected that by like the end of the 20th century into the turn of the 21st, like the big question was going to be like what we were going to do when robots had automated everybody's jobs. Like that was, but it wasn't in like people were going to be, destitute and poor. It was like, oh, people were going to have all of their needs met, so people would actually have all this excess leisure time to like actually do things that they were passionate about, they cared about. The whole show, The Jetsons, was all about this. So like the whole writers behind The Jetsons were essentially creating not so distant future world where people had essentially eliminated the need for work. So if you remember, George Jetson only worked at Spacely Sprockets for like 2 hours out of the week, and he would be like, "Oh my God, I had to work so hard today." And he just pressed a button for like an hour. It was just like that was the whole idea.
What about that?
Yeah, that was the whole. And so like even his wife, Jane, would always be like, today I had to work so hard. All I had to do was like press this button and it made like this whole meal for me. Like the idea was like people would just have all this leisure time, but so much so that they would be so like they wouldn't know what to do with all of it. And so like there was a huge concern about like, well, people are going to have all this free time. We need to make sure that people are educated and have access to the arts and all of these things so they know how to actually like cultivate these interests so they don't get into trouble essentially. So yeah, we need to rekindle that. We need to remember that was, and this wasn't just like a left-wing thing. Even like conservative economists thought that this was really trending.
So I feel like this should be its own episode. Like, can you give some analysis on the immigration issue and the talking points that Black people need to stay out of it and stuff like that?
I mean, I think we should not be that narrow-minded and only focus. There is a way that you could express the immigration issue. I know a lot of us don't like when we have to do this, but like appealing to people's own like material and economic self-interests. I think because of the way that our society, it's not just about people being selfish or like inconsiderate. It's just that we live in a society where people have been socialized to be atomistic, essentially, not because they want to be, but because the nature of their work and the way that our communities are set up. And so like, I think there's a way, again, I don't have time to go into it now, but there is a way to like frame that to get them to understand that like the immigration issue actually does impact them at a very real level. But the way the media talks about it, again, I always tell people, stop. If you try to get everybody you know and love to stop watching mainstream news because it's distorting. It's not because they're purposely trying to like distort. It's just like the medium and the whole way that they try to just like, it's all about a spectacle. It's all about getting you to like, it's all about ratings and stuff. So like, stop watching that. It's just going to distort you and lead you astray.
Well, I think we hit our time for this topic. Thank you, Jared, as always, for a very nuanced conversation. Please let us know in the chat. We can still talk about it. And Jared usually checks the comments like, what is the American dream to you? Do you believe in it? Yeah.
I would love to hear what people think. I'm genuinely curious, like, because, I don't want people to be, cynical and whatnot. And so, like, hopefully we can, out of some disappointments, we can start to, like, chart a new path rather than going back to the same thing. And, the Stockholm syndrome we have with the American dream.
Yes, the Stockholm syndrome that we have with the American dream. Yes. What book did you recommend? Or is there one that's close to this topic?
Not particularly. I don't really have I can see the link to the New York Times article.
Yeah, send me the New York Times article.
Cool. Yeah, I can do that.
So while we have y'all here, we have a special announcement like that's gonna, coincide with our 50th episode. You can let them know.
All right, so I'm super excited to announce that for our 50th episode, to commemorate our 50th episode, we're going to be taking Poli Side-Eye to the podcast world. So I've had lots of people over the last few months, who have like messaged me on social media or like texted me and been like, hey, I really love Poly Side-Eye, but like I don't have YouTube Premium, and so I don't want to hear all the ads. And like, are y'all on Spotify or are y'all on Apple Podcasts or whatever? So like, I'm in the process of getting pretty much our whole Poly Side-Eye repertoire kind of together and collated, and then we're going to load all of that to to Spotify and Apple Music, Apple Podcasts. So like, if you are much more of a podcast person versus like a YouTuber, you'll be able to listen to me like opine about politics when you on the Stairmaster, or if you are doing whatever the hell you be doing. So like, it's coming soon for the 50th episode.
Yeah, and I'm excited about that because I feel like this is definitely like podcast conversation too. I mean, can't you transfer the videos too now these days?
I don't know if Spotify has a video feature. I'm not familiar enough with Apple's platform.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a huge podcaster, never have been, incidentally. So like, this isn't really my world, so I'm still learning. So if anybody has any suggestions about podcasts and things, like by all means, like
please do. Also, like if we ever do get like ad deals or ad offers, I still can't see you doing like, oh well, sign up today, 15% off on this. Like on
right. Could you imagine? I'm like on my soapbox about how much I hate consumerism, and
right.
And I'm like, and make sure you shop and buy these. Yeah. So
but yeah, y'all, look out for that, the podcast. I'm really excited about that. Yeah, so y'all know where to follow Jared, JC Tiger Fan. It's right there. And well, what do y'all have to look forward to? I don't know what we're gonna do.
We didn't say the most important. Tomorrow's a holiday.
Oh my God! Happy Juneteenth. Thank you. Before they come after us. Yes. Right. Happy Juneteenth, everyone.
We can thank Nancy Pelosi and all the people who knelt in their kente cloths in the Capitol Rotunda. Does anybody remember that? That was like the most like.
That was wild.
I feel like it was like an SNL skit. Just like Nancy Pelosi's old ass, like can't even stand back up after she kneels down in this kente cloth. I'm just like, you really lost the plot. But whatever, people get a day off, so like, let me not be, know.
Well, I'm working tomorrow, but yeah. But yeah, y'all. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and share, please. Share. And we will see y'all for our 50th episode.